Welcome to Jewish Cinémathèque, where we meet some of the important faces involved with films that tackle aspects of the Jewish experience. Today I'm joined by Sarah Botstein and Lynn Novick, who together with Ken Burns directed the outstanding 6-hour-plus series, The U.S. and the Holocaust. This was not Sarah and Lynn's first time working together. Previously, they've made such outstanding documentaries as Hemingway, the Vietnam War, Prohibition, The War, and Jazz, all broadcast on PBS. The three-part series being aired on PBS studies the rise of Hitler and Nazism in Germany in the context of global anti-Semitism, including here in the United States. It examines how the US government, the American people, and American Jews reacted to what was happening to European Jewry in the years preceding, during the war, and after. It also sheds light on what was known here as the Shoah was unfolding.
We tell ourselves stories as a nation. One of the stories we tell ourselves is that we're a land of immigrants. But in moments of crisis, it becomes very hard for us to live up to those stories.
The Holocaust was beyond belief. People just disappeared.
The primary goal was to get to the United States.
But the golden door was not wide open.
We are challenged as Americans to think about what we would have done, what we could have done, what we should have done.
In our better moments, we are very good people, but that's not all there is to this story.
Sarah, Lynn, welcome to Jewish Cinémathèque. It's really a delight to have you here with me. So how did this project begin?
There's a little bit of an origin story here, which I will briefly say, which is that we'd certainly all been interested in the subject of the Holocaust. How could you not be a sentient person and want to know more about what happened and understand that tragedy? And we had touched on it in a film we did with Ken on the Second World War. And Ken had explored in great detail sort of FDR and his presidency in another series about the Roosevelts. Suffice to say, it was there in the background, but in 2015, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum approached us because they were planning an initiative called Americans and the Holocaust. It was going to culminate with an exhibition, but also a kind of a research project and community engagement activities, and really a nationwide sort of exploration of the questions: what did we know, when did we know it, and what did we do, what did we not do? And they approached us to say they were embarking on this project. Would we like to partner with them in some way and make a documentary film on the same themes? And we immediately said, yes, this is an incredible opportunity. We would love to do this, and we'd love to work with the museum and their staff. And that was in 2015. It was a really very different world.
Very
when we
different
think about, right?
Yeah.
And so we said, yes, we wanted to do it. And in that time, for myself personally, I will say, my initial thought was, for all the reasons I said I'm interested in the topic, but also, even then, this question of immigration and American identity and whether we are or are not a nation of immigrants and how immigration and immigrants are weaponized in the political landscape was something I was very interested in exploring in this context.
Even though it wasn't in the headlines at the time.
Even though it wasn't in the headlines. It's always been there, in different ways. It wasn't front and center, but it was certainly there. It took us a while because we had other projects we were working on. The Vietnam War, and Sarah and I made a film about people incarcerated who were getting college degrees called College Behind Bars. So we had many other things going on. We committed to doing this, but we couldn't turn our full attention to it right away. And that is why it is coming out now in 2022.
And the exhibit actually came out, in 2018?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the reaction to the exhibit?
From us or from the world?
From the world, just in terms of?
Yeah, I don't know. I think
it's been relatively positive. They now have a touring exhibition. They're leaving it up longer than I think they initially planned. Mm-hmm. Library associations can mount a traveling version of it. So I think it's been relatively successful.
And was it Daniel Green who was a curator of it, and he's also in your film?
Right.
And he put together a lot of the research?
He did. There's also now sort of a catalog reader called Americans and the Holocaust that he and another scholar put together. He and another extraordinary historian who's in the film, Rebecca Erbelding, were very responsible for the content of the Americans and the Holocaust.
And now, Sarah, I understand it's your responsibility to do educational work on this and digital outreach.
So we all work on the educational materials, and we worked particularly closely, actually, with the museum on the educational material, since part of the mission of the museum and the work that they do institutionally is not only to understand Holocaust education nationally, the pedagogy behind why certain things should and shouldn't be taught and how they should and shouldn't be taught, and all the curriculum standards, which we really are not experts in any way, but trying to figure out ways to use this film with the materials that already exist, and then new lesson plans that we hope will be of interest to American students thinking about the Holocaust through the lens of the American experience.
Choosing your historians. I mean, you chose quite an interesting group of historians. Daniel Mendelsohn, Deborah Lipstadt, Nell Irvin Painter, among several others. How did you go about making those choices?
Well, we follow the same process for every project. So what I'm going to say would apply to this film and other projects that we've worked on, which is we look for the foremost experts in the field because we know we are not that. And then we also look for people who can bring different perspectives, so varieties of points of view and also different expertise. So in this case, we have people who are students of the Holocaust. We have people who are students of America's reaction to the Holocaust and response to it. We have people who are just experts in American history generally. And each of them brings a different point of view to the project. And not everyone who's an advisor appears on screen. And not everyone who's on screen is an advisor. So we avail ourselves of quite a range of expertise at different stages of the project. And we're really grateful to the scholars who advised us from the scripting, the research, behind the scenes, who to interview and what to ask them, as well as the people who appear on screen. And some of them come to screenings and some of them don't. So we really are open to hearing from the experts and the people who've spent their lives dedicated to the topic.
And what happens when they contradict each other?
It's pretty fun.
Yeah.
I would say that we probably all have stories from each subject of when historians disagree with each other, sometimes at a meeting and sometimes over dinner. And those conversations, I think, actually inform for us in the filmmaking camp, they're really arguing about this. That's a very centrally important thing that we need to explore in the film more and figure out how to have different points of view, have a thoughtful conversation on film, even if they can't have it at a dinner table.
When I went to school, there was no such thing as the Ken Burns effect. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that really impacted the way you shot this film, particularly the stills?
Oh.
Because it's wonderful how you bring these still photographs to life.
So the Ken Burns effect that's on the Apple computers is sort of just a program to make the camera move, zoom across, up and down, etc. And that's sort of a shorthand for what we do in a way. I think the secret to what we do and what Ken really pioneered many, many years ago before I started working with him on his very first film, Brooklyn Bridge, it's in breathing life into these still photographs. And how do you do that? It's not always by moving across them. It's actually by treating them as if they're real, which they once were. Once upon a time, somebody stood there and had their picture taken. And that's 100 years ago, but you want your audience to think it's happening right now. So how do you do that? It could be that you're slowly drifting in the way you would in a Hollywood close-up, or you're pulling out, but you're also hearing whatever is present in the image. It could be the sound of a wind. It could be a dog barking. It could be a car door shutting. It could be, an ambulance going by, depending on sometimes what you see in the picture, sometimes what you imagine could be just outside the frame. And you multiply that by the hundreds of images in every film we make. It's treating these images as the reality they once were, and it's a magic trick of a kind, cinematic magic trick, because this is a two-dimensional silver nitrate piece of paper. Now it's a digital file, but our imagination is, with the right prompts, able to really make it real.
And sometimes those photographs are photographs taken by the perpetrators. So how do you deal with that?
Well, I think that's probably, we both want to talk about that and talk amongst ourselves. We've spent some time in the last couple of weeks as the film has gone out about why we selected the images that we selected and how we use them and how we worked with our editors. And I think three things. First of all, in making a film about the United States and the Holocaust, I'm not sure when we started the project that we would have understood how much of the actual story of the Holocaust we were going to include in the film. And it became clear to us when we really got into this how much, I'll say for myself, we didn't even understand about the actual chronology of what was happening to the Jews, first in Germany, then in Austria, then in Czechoslovakia, then when Hitler invades the Soviet Union, and trying to really understand how much happened before Americans were on the ground in Europe as the war was brewing and happening, how much of it happened in secret, how much of it happened outside of the traditional ways I think people collectively think about the Holocaust. 6 million Jews die in concentration camps. Where are those places? Sort of unpacking for American audiences the basic facts on the ground of what was happening became very important. And then calibrating, which is a word Ken always uses and I think is really apt, with our editor about how much was important to show so that the documentary evidence and the facts on the ground, which do have images for and footage of, are shown as respectfully as possible for the historical record, for the memory of the people who died, for the families of the people who died, and in some ways to honor the dignity with which they walked to their deaths in horrific circumstances. That was very, very important to us. And doing that, particularly in the second show, which is before Americans are on the ground in Europe, I think is, was very important and took a lot of time. It was one of the last things we finished in the film, because we were also trying to juggle what Americans were seeing, not just what they were reading about in the newspapers, and with the language that was used at the time versus the language that we use now. So we were very, very careful, and every choice that you see in the final film really was the outcome of a lot of discussion. And then at the end of the show, sort of similar things. How much of the liberation do we show? The chronology of the liberation. What's color? What's black and white? Is it too much? Is it not enough? And those are subjective questions and answers, but very, very important to what we were trying to do.
And quite a difficult task.
Very.
Yeah.
And then to Lynn's point, also sound. Do you keep them silent? Do you affect them? Do you make them, do you manipulate them? If you do, why and how? Are they in the right place? Just all of that.
I mean, this is one of the most important conversations to have, because as filmmakers, what we do is exactly what Sarah's been talking about, and yet, we are right on the line, right, of voyeuristic, sensationalistic, exploitative representation of something that is horrific and that people want to watch, for better and for worse.
Right.
Right? And we are very aware of that. And I think one of the most powerful moments in the film is the interview that Sarah did with Timothy Snyder, where he talks about the trophy photo. And that echoes back and forth in time to Abu Ghraib and to the Civil War, and
to
the
lynching.
power, right, lynching photos, exactly. The power of the camera as a weapon of good or bad, depending, and as a instrument of control, and sort of defining what's in front of you and taking something from someone. I mean, these are all very profound and complicated questions, right? And then on the other hand, we have a scene in the film where and this is something we also put in kind of late in the film, there's 3 or 4 photographs that were taken at Auschwitz.
Yeah, that was incredible.
Which are, incredible. They were smuggled out, at great peril to the people who took those images, so that the world could just prove, like Sarah's saying, of, this happened. And it's the only images we have, and they're very hard to even see what's happening there. It was just the fact that those pictures were taken. We created a scene around that, so you could begin to just start thinking about the camera as evidence, but also, what does it take to get these pictures?
And as weapon.
As a weapon. I mean, right. And so these are questions that we can't really fully answer, really, as human beings, but we can try to engage them with the film. And I think we're especially, gratified we were able to do that with this film, and to maybe help just for ourselves understand what we're seeing. And but even so, the impulse would be kind of like, we couldn't do this because we're also trying to tell a story. So if you were to label every photograph, okay, this was taken by the Dutch Nazis as propaganda to show this, or, you would start thinking the whole time who's taking the picture. And we're actually trying to make something real. On the other hand, every once in a while we do it, and at least that, we hope, gives the audience a chance to start thinking about that. So the sort of corollary to all of that is when Guy Stern's family is being deported at the end of the second episode. And, we came across, his family shared with us this footage of the people from his town being deported, and his family are in there. And when we first saw it, we have to think, well, this is taken like a propaganda movie, showing how great everyone's looks reasonably, well fed and taken care of. And so we kind of had to assume that it was taken by the Germans for propaganda purposes. So we just try here and there to kind of seed this idea, and then let the audience hopefully always be mindful of some of the dynamics, but still be able to follow the story.
What a difficult task.
Yeah.
You start the film with Anne Frank. Mm-hmm. Interesting choice. Mm-hmm. We see the Frank family, mm-hmm. time of, January 1933. Mm-hmm. Hitler's just become the chancellor, or at least he's been elected. Mm-hmm. Why?
Well, when we began to seriously start work on the film, it came to our attention that the Frank family had tried to get to America, which was very surprising to us. And we thought, okay, let's take most people's early understanding or entry point to this history is the Diary of Anne Frank. You read it in middle and high school. It's where people begin to learn the word Holocaust, understand the, Jews in hiding, people who die, all of those things. And that it's never, I didn't realize that she tried to get to America. Lynn didn't realize, Ken didn't realize, Jeff didn't realize. So we were able to get
Jeff is your writer,
our
Jeffrey
writer,
Ward.
the incomparable writer, Jeffrey C. Ward, who has really tread over this period in history so many times, and I think did an extraordinary job writing this film. And YIVO, the great Jewish archive down on 15th Street, has Otto Frank's files, and we got the letters into the office and we spread them on the conference table, and we all started rifling through them going, oh my goodness, this is they had really good contacts, they had the right money, they had the right, there's a lot of paperwork that went into getting out, and they had all of those things. And their visa application was later tragically burned in a fire. But the idea that you could teach Anne Frank to an American middle schooler and say, Anne Frank could be alive today had it been easier to get to the United States. That's very surprising to most people. And then it sort of set us on a path to think about Anne Frank, not only in the context of maybe having gotten to America, but let's just think about Anne Frank. So we ended up interviewing the extraordinary, now Eva Schloss, then Eva Geiringer, who was an Austrian Jew who was in the same Jewish community in Amsterdam, and about Anne Frank's age. Her brother Heinz, Anne Frank's sister Margot, all went to school together, all knew each other. They were deported at about the same time. Eva Schloss and her mother survive. Otto Frank survives, and I don't want to give a spoiler, but...
Don't give a spoiler, because I was quite taken by that.
Right, so that, can you imagine? We're working on this film about America and the Holocaust. We're suddenly going down a whole road about Anne Frank, which is fascinating, and then ends up with, I think, for me personally, one of the more interesting conversations about the legacy of the Holocaust, and film, and literature, and how we remember, and why we remember, and why Anne Frank is so beloved. It's a beautiful diary. It's a very important historic work. She's an extraordinary writer. Everyone who's interested in her should read Francine Prose's book about the diary and her. But as
even the new version of the diary.
Right.
Yes, right.
Absolutely.
But as Deborah Lipstadt beautifully says in the film, it's not actually the story of the Shoah. So
Yeah, but I will say it was with some trepidation that we actually considered doing this.
Yes, I agree.
Because, right, I mean, we thought about it a lot.
we spent a whole
It
drive.
was like forbidden turf that you
Or
were.
it's cliche. I mean, just to say, or what you know, just the obvious choice or something, right? So we really
Yes.
worried that, you know, it's a movie about the Holocaust, and the first thing you're going to do is show Anne Frank, and people are going to say, wait, you're going to tell me about Anne Frank? But for all the reasons Sarah said, we definitely realized it was the right thing to do, but it wasn't something automatic. It took a lot of back and forth.
Right, and then which parts of the story to tell and how. And then I thought you were going to say how many conversations. I remember vividly just having lunch with Lynn one day thinking about, okay, what's the coda to the Anne Frank story, which is, I think, for me, equally important.
Yeah, yeah.
And not discussed enough.
No, and I wish we didn't get into Eleanor Roosevelt's, you know, endorsement of the book and et cetera, but sort of the way it's been universalized. Deborah Lipstadt spoken a lot,
and
right?
universalized, right.
Sort of, so you
and
know.
Meyer Levin's version tossed to the wind. Yeah.
Yeah. So we didn't get into all that, but it's a wonderfully important, not wonderfully, it's a horribly important story that, you know, could take more exploration. So
I was, you know, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was my grandfather's favorite person in the entire world.
Yeah.
But I was a little taken aback by how, in effect, he comes off as being, you know, he tried. He was limited. He couldn't do this because of that and whatever. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I'm sure that there are going to be historians who are going to say you were too nice to FDR.
And there are historians who are going to say we were too hard on FDR, and hopefully that will be great. We welcome that criticism. Yes, I'm sure there will be. You know, I've been thinking a lot. It's not a direct answer to your question, but why so much focus on FDR? Not to say that he's not important, he is, but Deborah Lipstadt kind of puts for us in context in the film the idea that, you know, it's too easy to just blame FDR. We've got the whole nation has to take some responsibility here, and that we have to, it's on all of us as a nation what we failed to do. That said,
he's the president, and it's his government and his State Department. And,
exactly.
Yeah.
The State Department is the part where I feel the most horrendous, in a way.
Oh my God! You make Breckenridge Long look like Mr. Villain.
Well, he's one of them for sure. But Cordell Hull is, you know, I think the thing is, and we don't maybe say this explicitly as much as implicitly, but that. And Danny Green does say it in the film, but the refugee crisis and the plight of the European Jews is not the highest priority for the United States government. It's probably not even the second or third priority. They're dealing with, you know, big global problems and a world war about to happen and then happening, and a depression before that, and, you know, a polarized and isolationist, anti-Semitic, racist country. So, yeah, Roosevelt could have stood up on the White House lawn and said, the most important thing we can do is to save the Jewish people of Europe, and there's nothing more important than that.
And what would have happened? He wouldn't have been reelected.
Certainly, it's hard to imagine, let alone have the Congress say, great idea. So we just sort of tried to paint a picture as much as we could of the challenges he faces and his perhaps limitations. We wish he could have done, we wish he had done more.
There will be people in your audience who will look at this and say, how dare you say such bad things about America? You're criticizing our country. You're going and digging into the past and bringing out such not nice things, and we have this wonderful, great country. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I know that you bring that out to the conclusion of the film, but clearly that was an interest of yours, and it seems to be that there are elements in this country trying to do just the opposite.
You want to?
We can both talk about this. This is so fascinating to me. I mean, I'll start. You can. I think it's very interesting that that people are critical of any idea of being critical of our past or of our country. Isn't the point of history or living in the world to critically think, to make the world better the next day? How do you do that? You think about the past. Where did you go wrong? What mistakes did you make? How can you do better? I'm really interested in this notion that we would be making Americans feel bad. Okay, there are moments in American history that none of us should be proud about, and there are moments in American history we should all be proud about. My grandparents, I think, are a perfect example of this. They tried to get out in 1935. They finally got here in 1949, having lost most of their family. And instead of being they were so happy to be in America. They were so patriotic. They were so proud of America. They were, deeply, and I think there's a whole generation of Jews who got here before, during, and after the war that are deeply patriotic, even though wings of their family might have survived had it been easier to come here. So you can hold both things at the same time. You can be proud of our democracy and proud of our freedom and proud of all the great things that America symbolizes, but the only way to make the country better for the future is to try to learn from our mistakes. And this is not a great chapter in American history when you're thinking about anti-Semitism, xenophobia, nativism, white supremacy, what kind of a country we want to be. And yet we helped save the world from fascist dictatorship. So it's wildly complicated in ways that give us a reason to make a movie.
Yeah, I mean,
just to have a job, right? I mean, that's,
yeah.
I don't know.
I guess, we understand we're living in a very complicated time where history itself is now, and has always been, honestly, but particularly right now, it's been polarized and being used as it's being weaponized, is the word I'm looking for, right? And so we're supposed to be breaking down right on party lines, somehow, that if you sell this kind of history, then you're good or bad, and vice versa. And I mean, we also have to recognize that history is written by the winners over time. So, history is not some abstract, set in stone thing. It's how we talk about what happened before, and who, depending on who we are, what questions we ask, what answers we're looking for. That's what history is, and it's always changing. So that just, I think it's sort of understanding that that's how it works is part of it. But I am interested in this tension right now that it kind of cuts to the question of what makes America great. And to me, what makes America great is our ideals and our values and the things we, in theory, cohere around, and that's the creed, whatever, all men are created equal, and we're entitled to equal justice under the law, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are beautiful things. And that's what I think we as a nation hopefully could all agree we aspire to. And then the disagreement is how far have we lived up to that, and how far have we fallen short? And is it okay to talk about the ways in which we have fallen short and continue to fall short? And it's the continuing to fall short that is, I think, driving the problem of the past, that we're not there yet. We have a long way to go.
In the film, there are many, many things, and I certainly encourage everyone to watch all of it. It's just an incredible experience. But there are many things that to this day will remain questionable or controversial. The point that you make that bombing Auschwitz was that, so maybe American aircraft couldn't reach Auschwitz at a certain point because America was too far away. There are scholars who are going to debate that and question that. And, we bombed, the Auschwitz munitions down the block.
Yep.
Why didn't we bomb the railroad? Why didn't we bomb the bridges? So these are some of the questions you address, and these are questions that will continue to be part of the broad discussion. Let's take a look at a clip from the 3-part documentary, The U.S. and the Holocaust.
Anti-Semitism intensified. The automobile pioneer Henry Ford blamed Jews for everything from Lincoln's assassination to the change he thought he detected in the flavor of his favorite candy bar. He bought himself a weekly newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, and used it to spread his anti-Semitic propaganda. In a series of 91 weekly articles called The International Jew, he promoted the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a Russian hoax that claimed there was a global Jewish conspiracy to take over the world. The Bolshevik Revolution in Russia had only seemed to confirm those fears. The articles were eventually reprinted in 4 volumes and translated into 9 languages, including German. Ford's newspaper continued printing its anti-Semitic bile and had the 2nd highest circulation in the country. Jewish Americans were already denied membership in private clubs. not hired by banks or prestigious law firms. Restrictive covenants kept them out of desirable neighborhoods. Strict quotas limited the number of Jewish students enrolled in universities and barred all but a handful of Jewish teachers from their faculties. Hotels advertised rooms only for Gentiles.
One of the most, I think, maddening things about anti-Semitism is an anti-Semite will hold a contradictory belief and it won't bother the anti-Semite, right? So Jews are capitalists, Jews are communists. Or Jewish men are weak and effeminate, or Jewish men are a sexual threat to non-Jewish women. These are contradictory beliefs that are illogical, that don't bother anti-Semites. So how do you fight back against that with logic?
What are the stereotypes associated with anti-Semitism? Something to do with money, something to do with smarts, but not positive or affirmatively, conniving, and a small cabal. Jews are very few in number, but they know how to control things. They are the puppet masters controlling the puppets.
You then deal with other questions. I was shocked to find that the Nazis came and studied Jim Crow laws when they were crafting the Nuremberg laws and the anti-Jewish laws, that we became a model for how to treat people as not people. That was just fascinating. So you included so many important issues. Anti-Semitism in this country, we never had anti-Semitism in this country. And after the war, we never had anti-Semitism in this country, even though our polls show that after we beat fascism, anti-Semitism after the war was just as bad as it was before the war. So how did you bring this whole thing? I mean, there's so much. You only had, 6 hours. My gosh, I'm going to sit through 6 hours. But you only had 6 hours. How did you make choices in terms of telling this side of America that maybe we need to know more about? What did you exclude?
We start off with an enormous amount more material than was in the film. In terms of the interviews we do, the script is a lot longer, the first-person voices are longer, the archival footage. So it's just a question of boiling and distilling and crafting and honing down to the final product. So for every scene that you see, it's 20% longer when we first started, if not more. And so it's sort of honing in on what's the best material, the most linear, streamlined way to tell the story, but still leave room for it to breathe. That's kind of the, keeping the craft of the filmmaking going so that you can actually watch this. And it is very dense, so we definitely need to, be sure of that. I think in the larger question of, shining a light on the aspects of our story that are hard to face or uncomfortable, are some of the words I've seen in some of the critical receptions of the film, uncomfortable truths. As we were saying, it's too easy for Americans to look across the ocean and be horrified by what the Nazis did, which we should be, and we are always very clear to say that we did not cause the Holocaust, we did not perpetrate it, we are not responsible for it. But we also have to recognize that some of the ideas underlying some of what Hitler believed and espoused of a master race and a hierarchy of races, racial purity, these kind of things. He wasn't the only one on the planet who believed in that. And that within America, this idea of white supremacy and a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant country, a Gentile-ruled United States, these are all the kind of words that were used explicitly and also implicitly when President Coolidge says America has to be kept for Americans. Okay, who is he talking about? Not my ancestors, so this is what happened. And we were interested in the Americans and the Holocaust, so to not talk about the things that shaped this worldview, America has something to answer for in terms of that. That's all.
I was just going to say, I think your question is part of what my answer would be, which is for any subject, but particularly for this one, when we decided to make the film and we sat down with the scholars and talked with Jeff and thought about what to include in the script and who we should interview, and went through the exhibition at the Holocaust Museum and began to think about the Holocaust through the American lens and it's sort of a political story, right? What were Americans thinking? What did they do about it? How did the government react? That the central questions were understanding American anti-Semitism in the context of early American history in the 20th century, and as the war was brewing. Okay, the mythology around the bombing of Auschwitz. What role did FDR play both in helping win the war militarily and in messaging and dealing with the great humanitarian crisis of the 20th century? I think all of those, when we began to think about, and the Isabel Wilkerson's book Caste came out while we were working on the film, and the wonderful scholar at Yale whose name is
James Whitman,
who's written a lot about Hitler's admiration for our treatment of the Native Americans and our Jim Crow laws. Those are all things we all looked at each other. Okay, we're making this film. They will all be central points in the film. So your question is sort of part of our answer, which is if you're going to explore this topic, those are the things we have to really drill down and think about.
You decide to end your film contemporaneously. You didn't stop with Johnson's Immigration Act. Some might turn around and say, it's those liberals trying to make a point and using this. Why did you decide to do that?
We put a lot of thought into this, as you might imagine, and it was a very collaborative effort of everyone on the team to think about how to end this film. And when it was first written, it didn't come up to the present. It was, we don't know what we're going to do with the ending, we're going to see. And as we're working on it, things kept happening around us. Charlottesville, the Tree of Life, and other events subsequent to that really seemed to be part of a longer continuum in our history. And that if we put a nice little bow on this in 1965 and said, Johnson gives a great speech, we've righted the wrongs of the past and we've lived up to our true creed, and we can, pat ourselves on the back for having fixed this problem. Mm-hmm. That would be a very nice, happy ending, but I think leave our audience with a very misleading sense of what the point of the whole story we've just told is. And, we've been saying this a lot, we are seeing this resurgence of authoritarianism and white supremacy and racism and hate speech and bigotry and anti-Semitism and violence and mob violence and insurrection and disregard for a threat to the rule of law and the peaceful transfer of power and free and fair elections and the free press and the kind of cornerstones of our democracy are really at risk right now. And so we just didn't feel that we could tell this story without bringing it up to the present.
I will just ask one last question, and that is the role of American Jewry. Stephen Wise is often looked at as a villain. He didn't do enough, and it seems like you make him out there he was trying to do everything he possibly can. Then you had the Hillel Cook Botstein group who were much more active and pushing the administration. American Jewry, Shash Steele was the approach. Keep it quiet, let's not talk about it, and we'll make it go away in our own little way.
Well, I think American Jewry is the same as European Jewry. It's not all one thing, and not everybody reacted the same way. Just like when we were thinking about how to represent the Jews of Eastern Europe and Europe, they're not all Roman Vishniak shtetl Jews, and they're not all really fancy Viennese Jews. I think we were both very interested in, and our amazing producer Mike Welt as well, in what was the American reaction of American Jewry in the 30s and in the 40s, and who was pushing, who was staying quiet, why they both made those choices, and to try to put those choices into the historic moment. And I think Daniel Mendelsohn is also helpful just in terms of his own family story. And, you know, he's gotten a lot of questions over the years since his book came out about why his great uncle would have made the decision, were he safely here in America in the early part of the 20th century, why he would go back to his beautiful town where he had a farm and a nice girlfriend and a, you know, those were choices that made sense to the people in the moments they were making it. So I don't feel comfortable judging the Jewish community who was pushing really hard or not pushing really hard. I just think it's important to understand that, like any group of people, they have different opinions.
Lynn Novick, Sarah Botstein, working together with Ken Burns and writer Jeffrey Ward, thank you so much for making an incredible piece of work. It's going to be one to be discussed, analyzed, examined, criticized, and lauded at the same time. So thank you so much for doing what you've done. The 3-part documentary, The U.S. and the Holocaust, it is a must-see for anyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.